Human rights. Some quick housekeeping as always. The rapporteur has to leave at 11 o'clock, so we will...
Sorry, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for coming. It's my honour to visit Somalia at the invitation of the Somalian government in order to investigate how Somalia is protecting human rights and respecting international law while countering terrorism, the threat of Al-Shabaab and ISIS. I acknowledge UNTMIS, its assistance for hosting me over the last 12 days. I wish to emphasize at the start that I'm an independent expert appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council, and I don't speak for the United Nations. First, let me express my sympathy and solidarity with the people and government of Somalia in the face of such severe terrorist threats over so many years. And in recent days, of course, the terrible attack on the military recruitment center here in Mogadishu, and I express my sympathy to the victims. Terrorism is an attack on human rights. It's an attack on the right to life and peaceful political processes and democracy. Al-Shabaab and ISIS, Daesh are sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council and recognized as an international terrorism threat. Somalia faces extraordinary challenges. At this point in time, I wish to start by urging the international community to not abandon Somalia at a time of security and humanitarian crisis, particularly when Somalia is one of the world's least developed countries and has fewer resources and capacities at its disposal than most countries to confront terrorism. I encourage the United Nations to effectively plan for the transition from UNTMIS to a future United Nations presence here in Somalia. I encourage the member states of the United Nations to ensure that the African Union mission here in Somalia is adequately funded into the future. And above all, I encourage the donor community to step up its funding for humanitarian assistance here in Somalia, with drastic cuts this year, leaving about 2 million people in need of assistance without that help. Now, I recognize the very extensive and genuine efforts by the Somali authorities to prevent terrorism through a comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy. It combines law enforcement, military operations, with efforts to prevent and counter violent extremism, to promote the protection of human rights, and to address the root causes of terrorist recruitment in Somalia. It does all of this under severe security and resource constraints. Somalia has engaged very actively in international human rights treaties, mechanisms, and procedures in recent years. It has some way to go, so I would encourage the Somali government to join some additional human rights treaties on the protection of women, the prohibition of enforced disappearances, the protection of children in armed conflict, and the abolition of the death penalty. I also encourage Somalia to join the 2 additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions of 1977, which apply in armed conflict, and to enact into domestic law new crimes of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. That would give Somalia additional tools to prosecute members of Al-Shabaab for the most serious crimes under international law and not just domestic terrorism offences. Now, in terms of the response of Somalia in particular areas, in the field of criminal justice, I acknowledge that Somalia has adopted significant measures that are consistent with human rights to criminalise and prosecute terrorism, to try them in the court system and punish terrorists. At the same time, I am concerned that some Somali laws have adopted excessive and overbroad definitions and offences of terrorism, as well as expansive intelligence and security powers under both the Counter-Terrorism Act and the National Intelligence and Security Agency Act that could compromise fundamental human rights. I'm also concerned that some terrorism offences attract the death penalty when they do not require intentional killing as required under international law. During my visit over the last 10 days, I received reports of arbitrary arrests, protracted pretrial detention, denial of legal representation, and possible enforced disappearances when countering terrorism. There were also reports of excessive uses of force by security forces and ill treatment in detention. I'm particularly concerned about widespread violations against children in armed conflict, particularly by non-state armed groups, including killings, maiming, forced recruitment, and sexual violence. I'm especially concerned that Somalia continues to use military courts to prosecute civilians for terrorism offences. Those military courts lack sufficient independence and do not fully respect international fair trial standards. I'm also concerned that prison conditions across Somalia for terrorist suspects and convicted prisoners do not meet minimum international standards. We visited the Mogadishu Central Prison here, where about 1,200 of the 1,600 prisoners are allegedly associated with Al-Shabaab. That facility, despite the best efforts of the prison authorities using their limited resources, is marked by chronic overcrowding and conditions which need to be dramatically improved. In relation to military operations against Al-Shabaab and ISIL, I recognise the achievements of the Somali authorities against both of them, and in particular recent successes by the authorities against Daesh in Puntland. But I am concerned that military operations currently do not fully respect international humanitarian law. In particular, I encourage the Somali National Army to adopt additional measures to protect civilians during the conflict. In particular, I'd encourage Somalia to adopt rules of engagement consistent with international humanitarian law, require investigations after military operations to ensure that no violations against civilians have been committed, to deploy legal advisors to give advice on the conduct of operations, and to establish a civilian casualty tracking cell modelled on that which exists in the African Union mission here, to ensure that the armed forces are systematically safeguarding civilians. I'm also quite concerned that the Somali authorities have drawn upon clan militias when fighting Al-Shabaab in particular, when the use and arming of those militias does not appear to be governed by an adequate legal framework, does not integrate those forces into the regular disciplinary and command and control structures of the Somali army. This, I think, is a potential recipe for abuses and violations. I also encourage the government to adopt a national IED strategy, improvised explosive devices, to assist in protecting the civilian population against the indiscriminate effects of those weapons. The Somali government and some of its partners, particularly the United States and the United Arab Emirates, are engaging sporadically in airstrikes against terrorist groups. I'm concerned about the lack of transparency around the use of those weapons, and encourage the authorities to ensure that airstrikes are under the command and control of the Somali government and are appropriately authorized by the Somali government. I'd like to comment a little bit on defections by Al-Shabaab and the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration program and centers. I think these have been a very useful tool for encouraging Al-Shabaab members to defect from the organization, and that can weaken Al-Shabaab's capabilities. But I do have concerns about how that program operates. I mean, apart from the loss of funding very recently, which has led to the closure of some centers, including the 2 centers for women who leave Al-Shabaab, I'm concerned that the DDR program lacks a clear legal framework, that the criteria for screening members of Al-Shabaab are not public and transparent. They don't fully respect human rights, and that the process of giving amnesties to Al-Shabaab members who voluntarily defect is opaque and based on a series of ad hoc presidential amnesty offers rather than an amnesty law adopted after public scrutiny and debate by the Parliament of Somalia. Most critically, I'm very concerned that the process for screening defectors does not appear to preclude or exclude those Al-Shabaab members who have committed serious international crimes. So Al-Shabaab members who might commit a war crime by murdering civilians or committing acts of sexual violence or forced recruitment or forced marriage could potentially still be eligible for the DDR program, and that is inconsistent with minimum international law standards. Somalia has adopted some good laws to counter the financing of terrorism. So at least 3 laws deal with that problem to try to choke off the $100 to $150 million a year that Al-Shabaab extorts from people and businesses and illegal activities here in Somalia. But I do have concerns that some of those laws go too far, and in particular have the effect of deterring or chilling the capacity of humanitarian actors to access Al-Shabaab controlled areas and to provide essential life-saving humanitarian aid to civilians in acute need. Under international humanitarian law, Somalia has an obligation to allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded delivery of independent and impartial humanitarian relief. The Security Council has also passed resolutions with exemptions from counter-terrorism and Somali sanctions for humanitarian action. And what I would propose is that Somalia ensures that its terrorist financing laws exclude independent, impartial humanitarian assistance from not only its implementation of Security Council sanctions, but also its own unilateral sanctions, because the Somali government has its own additional list of terrorists, as well as criminal terrorist financing and asset freezing laws. I'd also encourage Somalia to not only exempt humanitarian relief by the United Nations and its partners, but also by other independent, impartial humanitarian actors. In this context, I would note that Somalia has already adopted other laws to prevent the abuse of or diversion of humanitarian aid to terrorism. Humanitarian actors themselves have very responsible due diligence measures to prevent their aid being diverted. So there are other ways of preventing funds and assets getting into the hands of terrorists which do not choke off essential humanitarian aid. I'm also quite concerned that financing laws plus some of the offences in the Counter-Terrorism Act also have chilling effects on civil society, non-government organisations, human rights defenders, and the media here in Somalia as well. I'm particularly concerned by a significant number of reports I've received about arbitrary arrests, assaults, intimidation, and even prosecution of journalists reporting on terrorism for simply doing their job. This is in addition, of course, to threats faced from Al-Shabaab. Additionally, some media outlets have been suspended by the government. Some of them have had accounts frozen. Websites and social media platforms have been suspended or shut down for commenting on terrorism or counter-terrorism. The authorities have also issued numerous vaguely worded directives prohibiting the dissemination of terrorist or extremist messages. And the NISA Act also has various prohibitions on disseminating information relating to NISA's activities. I'm also concerned about the national media law, which equally prevents false and unfounded information or other information endangering national stability. Many of these laws are vaguely worded, they're overbroad, they're prone to abuse, and they do have a chilling effect in practice on the ability of journalists to do their job. I encourage the Somali government to be more transparent and open about its terrorism, its response to terrorism, its counter-terrorism operations. Of course, sometimes there are legitimate reasons for the government to restrict certain information if that's necessary to ensure the security of current military or other law enforcement operations. But those should be the exception, not the norm. And I'm concerned that the climate here in Somalia at the moment makes it very difficult for the media to fulfill the public's right to information about matters which deeply affect every Somali citizen. Two final matters before I open to questions. I would encourage Somalia to consider improving its mechanisms for the oversight and accountability of its counter-terrorism activities. Most of the security actors, so the police, NISA, the military, the financial agencies, are only subject to either internal scrutiny mechanisms or mechanisms which are still part of the executive government, like governing ministries. It's best practice under international law to, in addition to internal security, internal oversight mechanisms, to have external independent civilian oversight of policing the military and intelligence mechanisms. I regret that 13 years after the Provisional Constitution was adopted, Somalia has still not adopted a National Human Rights Commission. It hasn't created the Ombudsman to investigate violations of basic rights and illegality and corruption in government. It hasn't created a constitutional court as envisaged, and it dissolved the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission in 2022. I'm very concerned that under the NISA Act, there are no complaints mechanisms for people who allege that NISA has violated their rights. And to the contrary, the NISA Act even gives broad immunities to members of NISA from investigation and prosecution, unless the Director General agrees to allow somebody to investigate. All of this is not consistent with the right to an effective remedy and accountability for serious violations of human rights under international law. Prisons also should be subject to independent external oversight. Under the Counter-Terrorism law, Counter-Terrorism Act, pardons for terrorist offenders by the court are available even if somebody may have committed an international crime. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission hasn't yet been established as proposed under the Constitution. And I'm concerned at reports I've received that even when sometimes people are investigated, so state officials are investigated for violations, political factors, clan affiliations can sometimes, even traditional justice processes, can sometimes interfere with formal accountability under the rule of law. Finally, I'd like to say something about what the United Nations calls the conditions conducive to terrorism, which means basically the root causes of terrorism. Under the United Nations Counter-Terrorism strategy, a range of factors can lead people to join terrorist groups. They include things like prolonged conflict, state violations of human rights, discrimination, political exclusion, and economic marginalization. I'm pleased that the Somali national strategy to prevent and counter violent extremism acknowledges that all of these factors can be relevant to the recruitment of Somalis to terrorist groups. I'm pleased that Somalia, as I mentioned, has a comprehensive strategy to stabilize recovered areas, to expand the state's security presence, to increase the availability of basic services, and to promote development in those regions, even though, of course, all of those efforts are subject to very severe resource constraints. I would like to make 3 recommendations in relation to these issues. Number 1, on economic marginalization. Obviously, Somalia is under great pressure with the deep cuts to donor funding. Somalia has a very low revenue or tax base. And although the government has been making efforts to improve the tax base, I think if you want to seriously pay for the kinds of basic services, development, stabilization that is needed to prevent people joining Al-Shabaab, then Somalia needs to do better. It needs to make establishing a universal taxation system to increase government revenues, to be able to pay for the things that its citizens need, and not be so dependent on donors. Then much more effort needs to go into expanding government revenues. Somalia shouldn't rely so much on private sector service provision, which leaves lots of people without adequate water, energy, sanitation, etc. These are public goods that should be provided by the government where there are those gaps. Secondly, on governance, efforts to counter terrorism are being undermined by certain current political factors. The centralization of political power, irregular and contested processes of constitutional reform, which have alienated some federal member states, excessive political influence of some major clans, including an unrepresentative 4.5 formula, which appears to give a 0.5 share to perhaps 30% of the population, many of whom are minorities, including the Bantu. The lack still of a one-person, one-vote direct election model, although I acknowledge the government's efforts towards achieving that. Restrictions on the number of political parties, the lack of a fully independent and impartial judiciary, and chronic underrepresentation of women in public life and the security sector. Corruption also drains the government and the economy and depletes public trust, and yet the Corruption Commission was recently dissolved. So here I urge Somalia to embark on a genuinely inclusive, bottom-up, transparent and meaningful national political dialogue beyond the current NCC process, including all stakeholders, all federal member states, to determine inclusively Somalia's political and constitutional future, to ensure political power is fairly distributed and includes minorities, and to redouble efforts to combat corruption. Final point just on conflict resolution. Somalia in recent years has adopted a heavily militarized approach to combating Al-Shabaab in particular. And although that has made important gains, I do think there is a consensus now that there can be no military solution to Al-Shabaab. It can be degraded through military and law enforcement action, but we need to use other tools to also combat the problem. I'm pleased that Somalia has encouraged high-level defections from Al-Shabaab and pursued the DDR process, but I encourage the government to intensify its efforts to negotiate with receptive elements of Al-Shabaab, if they can be found, and to seek political reconciliation where this is feasible, rooted in Somali customs of dialogue and negotiation. And I encourage third parties, the international community, to assist as neutral intermediaries upon Somalia's request. This is a critical moment for Somalia with the current funding climate, the political transition, the African Union and United Nations transitions. Sustained international engagement is essential to support national efforts to build lasting peace, strengthen the rule of law, and protect human rights while countering terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saul. Folks, we are very tight for time. Mr. Saul has to leave in about 23 minutes, so please type questions as well. Quick reminder, we have his full remarks to share with you. We also have an English and Somali press release for you as well, so please let us know if not. Without any further ado, any questions, please raise your hand and tell us your name and your media outlet. Front row, please, there in the white shirt.
Thank you, sir. My name is Abdulrazak Abdullahi Adam. I'm from Mustaqbal Media. So my question is that, given the security challenges in Somalia, how can the UN ensure that counter-terrorism operations do not violate human rights? And what concrete steps will be taken to minimize the harm these operations may cause to local communities? And the second question is that, could the financial difficulties faced by the AUSM operation potentially impact the fight against Al-Shabaab? Thank you.
Thank you.
Take a few.
Okay. Other question too. Do it in groups, please. So, question front row again, blue.
Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed Kahir from China Global Television Network. I want to take into account about you said you don't represent the UN, but you are an independent expert. There's scheduled the UN security meeting to discuss funding for the new peacekeeping operations here in Somalia. And there's growing concern that hesitations by some traditional donors like US could impact counter-terrorism operations by both the peacekeepers and the Somali security forces. So do you have concern, and what is your call on this upcoming UN Security meeting to discuss funding issues? Thank you.
Is that enough? One. Any more questions, please? Sorry, you used to, sir, the glasses.
Firstly, my name is Yusuf from RNS from TV. I have a question. How are you sure that your efforts in the counter-extremism also protecting human rights and complete in the international law?
Okay, thank you for your questions. A couple of questions on the funding of peacekeeping and the African Union mission. As I said in my statement, I'm deeply concerned that the United States in particular is impeding, it seems at the moment, the resolution of a funding package for the African Union. Everybody knows that the current United States administration is challenging on many levels, politically, financially. That's the reality of the world we're living in. I encourage, of course, the United States to continue to engage in Somalia. I think that's in the national interests of the United States itself, because, of course, the United States has long been deeply concerned about international terrorism, including Islamic State, Al-Shabaab as an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And so I hope that in the United States government, good sense would prevail, and that they would understand that supporting Somalia to combat international terrorism is in the interests of protecting the United States and its own people. Now, if the United States doesn't come to the party, then the rest of the world has to step up. If there is that gap, it needs to be filled. I'd encourage other donors with capacity to support peacekeeping, a continuing peace presence in Somalia. But at the end of the day, Somalia itself also will have to step up, and that's why, as I mentioned, for a long time, Somalia has been dependent on foreign aid in the security sector, other parts of governance. That's for good reason, because Somalia is so underdeveloped compared to many other countries. But the government's economic reform program, last year there was 4% economic growth. It has significantly increased revenues in the last few years. So I think the Somali government realizes it has to take more responsibility for its own financial affairs, its own security. It still absolutely needs technical assistance and financial support. But unfortunately, we live in a world where you can't count on foreign friends you'd hope you could count on. So we have to keep advocating for the international community to support Somalia, but Somalia has to be prepared to stand more on its own 2 feet as well. On the other questions, how do we counter terrorism while respecting human rights, and how do we counter violent extremism while respecting human rights? Today I can only give a few suggestions, but I'd encourage you to take a look at my end of mission statement, which is available on the internet at the moment in English. We'll try to translate that into Somali a bit later as well. But that goes through in detail the various issues I touched on today as to how to improve policing, military operations, the DDR process, the protection of women and children, conditions in prison, governance, and other issues, all of which are relevant to protecting human rights while countering terrorism. So there's no one thing you can do. You have to mainstream human rights across all of those parts of the Somali authorities which are engaging in countering terrorism. Thanks.
Any other questions, please? In the corner, end there, please. Give your name and who you represent to, please.
No. My name is Abdurrahman Jelani. I am from Arlada Media. I have two questions. On Mogadishu prison, according to some who were detained there, including journalists, one single room is for 100 inmates, and also they reported that human rights violations there. Is international community going to end these issues? The other question is on anti-terror operations. You flagged a concern about what you described as a clan militia used by federal government. Can you please elaborate on that? Thank you so much.
Any other questions at the same time? End here, please.
Okay, my name is Muhammad Dahar, and concerned about local people reason to fight Al-Shabaab, but the issue could be dangerous. That
Yeah, go.
Any other questions? Over to you, Mr. Saul.
Okay, thank you. On Mogadishu Central Prison, so look, we visited yesterday, and in one of the cells, there were 118 prisoners in a room a bit bigger than this one, but incredible overcrowding, which is inhumane and under international law would constitute cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. The prison authorities are aware of this, but they don't control the budget. I mean, they're doing the best with what they have. But the Mogadishu Central Prison is a 210-year-old building. I mean, it was built as a prison 2 centuries ago. I mean, it's absolutely not fit for purpose anymore. Its capacity, supposedly, I think Karen was 500 or 600 people, and they have 1,600. So the capacity the government has estimated is 800. It's got 1,600, so twice as many. And frankly, I don't think 800 is a reasonable figure either. The condition for the women prisoners is a bit better because overcrowding is not as bad, but certainly, the prisoners are locked in the cell 23 hours a day. There are very limited activities for them by way of education, literacy, numeracy, rehabilitation, de-radicalization. And so these are not conditions which, when you think about eventually, Al-Shabaab prisoners, many of them will be released into the community. That's not a good way to prevent people from returning to terrorism if you treat them in such a bad way. Again, the government needs to invest in new prison facilities. I'm pleased that the government has built some more modern correctional facilities here in Mogadishu. Some international partners have funded some renovation and rehabilitation of some prisons as well, but a lot more needs to be done, and you can't keep jamming more and more people, particularly with the intensity of the recent operations against Al-Shabaab. You can't keep stuffing more and more people into a very small prison. This is why also I'd encourage Somalia to sign the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, because it would create an independent inspection process so that more scrutiny can be placed on prisoners. It's not just Mogadishu. I mean, I'm concerned about, we visited a police detention facility in Puntland as well, where prisoners were shackled by their legs despite being already locked in a cell. We saw at least one child detained amongst adult prisoners. So there are many issues with treatment in detention, overcrowding, food, water, sanitation, education, etc. On the local people fighting and clan militias, so look, this takes different forms. Sometimes civilian defence forces or local militias take up arms in self-defense against Al-Shabaab attacks in their area. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is where the government provides ammunition or sometimes arms to clan militias, coordinates more closely with clan militias where government operations are going on. And it's that second category that is of more concern, because they are kind of acting like proxy forces for the government without the training, the procedures, the discipline, the accountability that ensures that state forces don't violate human rights. In Puntland, the situation's a bit different. In the Kalmasgad mountains, where the campaign against ISIL is going on by the Darawish Puntland forces, there the civilians are mobilizing to assist the military effort by providing food, goats and transport by donkeys and camels and that kind of assistance. I'm not concerned about, but certainly when the government coordinates so closely with militias that don't have those safeguards in place to ensure respect for humanitarian law and human rights. We've heard stories of clan militias beheading Al-Shabaab members on capture. These are war crimes under international law. So we want to make sure that everybody understands the Somali security forces are under pressure. Clan militias could provide support, but you've got to do it in the right way, and that's not what is currently happening. Thanks.
Are there any more in-person questions here? If not, we'll go online. Okay, we have 2 online questions written. I'll read them out very quickly here. They're very similar. Terrorism has been a key reason. Are the current trends and level of insecurity?
The level of Daesh presence in Puntland, I think, is fair to say, was a surprise to the authorities. That they were there was known, but on the kind of scale that was discovered was surprising. I think there's been considerable success by Puntland forces. The numbers we heard originally, maybe 1,000 Daesh, now down to maybe 300 to 500. So significant numbers killed, some captured, others dispersed. And now they've been confined to some, fairly limited cave areas in the mountains. And that Daesh presence was not just a threat to Somalia. I mean, it was an operation with mostly foreign fighters, maybe 80-90% foreigners, and being used as a base for planning of potential Daesh operations across the region, not just against Somalia. Al-Shabaab, on the other hand, is it's more of a Somali nationalist military outfit. Of course, it's a regional threat too, because it has ambitions for a greater Somaliland and to seize and govern, in its dream world, bits of ethnic Somali territory in neighboring countries. So it of course it's mounted attacks in Kenya, we know. So look, to link it to the second question, absolutely, multilateral support for groups which are listed by the international community as terrorist should absolutely continue. It needs to be coordinated with the Somali government. I am concerned at reports that particularly some airstrikes by the United States are done unilaterally without consultation or potentially the consent of the Somali government. So I encourage foreign partners to coordinate closely with Somalia on airstrikes. But airstrikes are not enough. The multilateral response needs to be a deeper one, engaging in security sector reform, economic support, governance support, because we know that terrorism, effectively combating terrorism, can't be done by just killing terrorists. You need to have a much more comprehensive approach. So the international partners who are here, it's a tough funding environment because the Europeans are reducing funding because they're concerned about Russia. Aid is depleting across the board. The United Nations is shrinking. But we have to continue to advocate for the international community to stay the course. Knowing that if we don't, then the threat will get worse and affect more countries, and then it will be more expensive and more difficult for more countries in the future. A final point I'd just add is that, respecting human rights while countering terrorism is not just the right thing to do, because we all should respect, for moral reasons, the human rights and dignity of every person, even a terrorist. Countering terrorism while respecting human rights also makes countering terrorism more effective, because you don't then fuel grievances about state abuses and violations that absolutely drive people to then join terrorist groups. So if you get it right by respecting human rights, not murdering or torturing civilians when you're fighting a terrorist group, in the long term, strategically, that will make your campaign more effective. Now, the Somali government understands this and is absolutely committed to this, but it's a long process to build the professionalism, expertise of Somali forces. Since 2006-07, it's only been a few decades to build, a new Somali state and institutions. That takes a long time to do really well. So everybody understands that, and I encourage Somalia to and its partners to continue along that path to ensure that human rights are respected across the board, and counterterrorism is as effective as it can be.
Folks, we have no more time. I imagine there's no more questions, though? No? Okay, in that case, Mr. Saul, thank you for your time. Safe travels, everyone. Thank you for your time this morning as well, too. We'll have also, as I said before, Press Somali and also the rapporteurs.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.
See you someday
Yeah.
on the road.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cheers.